It was a clear day. Autumn sunlight squeezed through the blinds of the courthouse mediation room, falling in strips across the long wooden table like prison bars. I sat on one side. Lin Wan sat on the other. Beside her was a middle-aged male lawyer in a dark gray suit, wearing that professional, gentle, and cruel smile. Mr. Shinyu. The lawyer pushed up his glasses and opened the folder in front of him. According to our client's statement, during the marriage you held no stable employment and had no fixed source of income. The family's primary financial burden was borne solely by Ms. Lin Wan. Specifically, over the past 3 years you attempted 2 entrepreneurial ventures, both of which failed, resulting in cumulative losses of approximately $47,000. During this period you made no equivalent financial contribution to the household. His voice was flat, like he was reading a grocery receipt. I said nothing. Outside the window, the sycamore leaves were half yellow. One gust of wind sent them fluttering down. A leaf stuck to the glass then was blown away. Furthermore, the lawyer turned to the next page. Our client's bank statements show that you repeatedly withdrew funds from the joint family account for personal project expenses without obtaining prior consent from Ms. Lin Wan. Based on the above facts, our side believes the marital foundation has been broken, and the at-fault party. Enough. Lin Wan spoke. She sat beside her lawyer, wearing a beige trench coat, her hair neatly pinned. The pearl studs on her earlobes were the birthday gift I'd given her last year. She looked up at me with an expression so calm it was almost cold. Shinyu, she said. Let's be direct. I'm filing for divorce for one reason. 3 years of marriage, and you've made no real contribution to this family. Your so-called entrepreneurship, in my book, is just throwing money at a pipe dream. I'm tired. I don't want to wait anymore. The mediator, a middle-aged woman with black-rimmed glasses, looked at Lin Wan, then at me. Her tone was gentle. Mr. Shun, you have anything to say? I opened my mouth. What was I going to say? That 3 years ago, when I sold my search engine company's shares, the check for $370,000 was put in our joint safe right in front of her. That the money was later transferred in 2 installments into our family account used for her father's heart bypass surgery and the initial working capital for her company. That every time she worked late, I'd stay up to make chicken soup and keep it warm in a thermos, waiting for her, and not once did she ever drink it. Would any of that make a difference? She'd already made up her mind, and I said, I agree to the divorce. Lin Wan's eyebrows twitched slightly, as if she hadn't expected me to be so agreeable. She probably thought I'd fight, make a scene, get on my knees, and beg her for one more chance. I would have before. The first time she mentioned divorce, I almost knelt. I said, give me 6 more months. She did. In those 6 months I stayed up nights working on 2 projects. One got ghosted by an investor, the other worked technically, but never found a market. 6 months later, she filed the suit. This time, I wouldn't. The lawyer slid the mediation record across the table. I picked up the pen and signed. My name looked dry on the paper. Shinyu. 2 characters, straight and square. I put the pen back and stood up. Wait. Lin Wan called after me. She pulled a card from her bag and placed it on the table. Take this. $50,000. Use it until you find a place to live. We were married once. I don't want you to be in a difficult position. I looked at the bank card on the table. Lin Wan always had to leave a little dignity. In court, she painted me as a leech on the marriage. Then she tossed a $50,000 card to make sure I wouldn't be too embarrassed. That kind of dignity stung worse than an insult. No need, I said. You keep it. I turned and walked out. As I reached the door, I heard her murmur to her lawyer behind me. See, that's how he is. Her tone carried that weary resignation of course. Outside, the sunlight was brilliant, glaring off the pavement. I stood on the courthouse steps, squinting. The dry autumn wind swept in, carrying the slightly bitter scent of fallen leaves. Something in my pocket was pressing against my leg. I reached in and pulled out a folded, old check. 3 years ago, after I sold those search engine shares, I split the money 3 ways. 1 part to Lin Wan for her company. 1 part for her father's surgery. And 1 part wrote on a check, tucked into a notebook. And never cashed. I'd thought of it as my last safety net, only to use if I absolutely had to. That absolute moment never came. Until today, the check was for $42,000. I'd sold the shares in a hurry back then and took a hit on the price, but $42,000 was enough to start over a few times. I'd never mentioned this money to Lin Wan. I kept thinking there was still a chance that the search engine project just hadn't met the right timing. When the trend came back around, I could pick it up again. Now the trend had come, but the person was gone. I folded the check and put it back in my pocket. I walked down the steps. A cab was waiting at the curb. I opened the back door and got in. Driver. South Side. Willow Lane. As the car pulled away, I looked back at the courthouse entrance. Lin Wan was just walking out. The hem of her coat lifting in the wind. She was looking down at her phone. Her profile clean and sharp. Without a trace of hesitation. Beside her was that suited lawyer. They seemed to be talking about something. She laughed. That laugh that I used to know so well. Back in college. When I'd pull all-nighters in the lab and she'd bring me food. I'd look up and see her smile like that. That smile changed over time. Became polite. Distant. Like frosted glass. Now the glass had shattered. On my side, there was nothing left to see. The cab turned a corner. And the courthouse disappeared from view. I leaned back and closed my eyes. The wind through the half-open window was dry and cold against my face. Willow Lane was where I'd rented during college, an old neighborhood of buildings slated for demolition, cheap rent, full of students and recent grads. My old landlord, Annie Chen, was surprised when I called and said I was coming back. Xiao Shin, that room of yours is still empty. I kept the key. Come anytime. The cab stopped at the mouth of the lane. I paid and got out. The lane was narrow. Lined with old cement-faced buildings. Moss creeping up the walls. Electrical wires crisscrossing overhead. A tabby cat sat by the trash bins. Licking its paw. It glanced up at me, then went back to grooming. I climbed to the 4th floor. The stairwell light was busted. I felt my way to the door in the dark. Reached up to the gap above the frame. And found the key Annie Chun had left. I turned it twice. The door swung open. The room smelled faintly of mildew. The single bed was still against the wall. The old desk was still there. The lampshade on the desk lamp had a crack running through it. Everything looked exactly as I'd left it. Like time had frozen here for 3 years. I set my bag down and walked to the window. Pushing it open for air. Dust plumed up, making me cough twice. Outside. I could see sheets and quilts hanging on the rooftop across the way. Bright and colorful. Snapping in the wind. In the distance came the noise of school children being dismissed. A parent shouting, "Slow down." I stood at the window. The check in my pocket pressed against me again. I pulled it out and unfolded it. $42,000. Dated 3 years ago. If I'd pulled this money out back then and said to Lin Wan, "Look, I still have a backup plan," would she have thought I wasn't completely worthless? I'd never know. It didn't matter anymore. I tucked the check under the glass plate on the desk. Then I sat down on the edge of the bed. My phone lit up. A credit card payment reminder. And a text from my old partner. "Zhou, Shinyu, I heard about the divorce. Don't lose heart. Remember that translation model you built in college? I just read a paper with an idea very similar to yours. This stuff is blowing up now. Do you still have that old code?" I stared at the message for a long time. Then I bent down and pulled an old cardboard box from under the bed. I opened it. Inside lay a yellowed Lenovo laptop. Thick as a brick, with a chunk missing from the corner of the screen. I carried it to the desk. Wiped off the dust. And plugged it in. The indicator light came on. When the screen lit up. A beam of autumn sunlight slanted in through the window. Falling across the keyboard. Warming the worn-out letter keys. I scrolled through the hard drive folders. Inside a hidden subdirectory labeled garbage. I found the prototype of the real-time translation engine I'd started in my junior year, the one my professor had laughed off as a pipe dream. The last modified date was 11 years ago. The last line of comments read only 3 words. Not doing this point 11 years ago. When I typed that comment, I thought I'd never touch this thing again. The professor was right. What value could a student's half-baked algorithm have? Better to get a real job and make a living. Now, 11 years later. I sat at a dusty desk in front of a laptop that could barely connect to the internet. That 11-year-old code lay quietly on the screen, like a seed buried so long no one remembered it was still there. I reached out and hit a key. The cursor blinked after the comment. Outside. Pigeons cooed and fluttered away. I typed a new line. Restarting. That old laptop took 6 full minutes to boot up. The OS was so outdated that the browser could barely load any website. But the files on the hard drive were all intact. I read through every line of the translation engine's source code. The more I read, the more a chill ran down my spine. In my junior year, I didn't know much about deep learning theory. I'd hacked my way through with a crude method, a recursive structure based on multi-layer semantic mapping, using limited computing power to brute force approximations. My professor had glanced at it, shaken his head, and said, "Theoretically, maybe it works. but the complexity at runtime. No hardware on the market could handle it. It's a castle in the air. I'd been young and stubborn. Argued back. He said, work a few years and you'll understand what practical means. So I dropped the project and went to an internship. 11 years later, I dismantled that code line by line. Refactored it. Adapted it to modern frameworks. Computing power today was hundreds of times what it was back then. Distributed training was standard. Those once impossible complexities were now just a routine training cycle problem. And the core logic of my crude method, the multi-layer semantic mapping and cross-modal alignment, happened to be exactly what the LLM industry was desperately seeking. The architecture diagram from the latest top conference paper had 70% similarity to my 11-year-old sketch. Only they'd spent billions and thousands of GPUs to get there. While I'd used a beat-up laptop and a few math books from the library, I made a detailed comparison table between the paper and my old code. The more I compared, the more I saw how absurdly fate played out. The thing I'd once believed in, dismissed as a fantasy and crushed to dust by reality, had become what the whole industry was chasing 11 years later. Lynn once said I was worthless. She didn't know that the man she'd thrown away held a key that could unlock an industry trend she couldn't even imagine. For the next week, I'd barely left the room. Annie Chin came up once to bring me food. A stack of hot leek pancakes. She leaned against the doorframe and said, Xiaoshin, you're thin. Eat more. I gnawed on the pancakes, my eyes never leaving the screen. I treated the old laptop as my master copy, transcribing every line of code onto a new machine, then migrating the environment and running adapt tests. I set 2 goals for myself. First, completely rewrite the original algorithm using modern tech stacks to produce a real-time inference sample that could run on a single card. Second, write a complete technical paper laying out the theoretical basis and experimental data clearly and submit it to a top-tier conference. When Joe heard what I was up to, he called me. Shinyu, you really dug that thing out. I know someone in Silicon Valley doing AI investment. Want me to send him your draft? Paper's not done yet. Finish it. I'll help you proofread. Shinyu, I think this could be something. Your approach is different from everyone else's. Others are throwing data and compute at the problem. Back then, you found a shortcut in the underlying logic under constrained conditions. Nobody's going down this road right now. If you get through, it's blue ocean. After hanging up, I stood at the window looking out. The old locust tree at the lane's entrance had almost shed all its leaves. Bare branches stretched toward the gray-blue sky, like fingers grasping at emptiness. I thought, if 11 years ago that autumn, I hadn't dropped the project, if I'd gritted my teeth and pushed through, where would I be now? But there were no ifs. I was starting over, with empty ground beneath my feet, but something solid in my hands. The paper took 2 months. Every day from 6 in the morning to 2 at night, barely stopping except to eat steamed buns and instant noodles. Annie Chin brought food a few more times. Once she pushed the door open and found me asleep at the desk, the screen still glowing. She didn't wake me, just left the container on the corner of the table and draped a jacket over my shoulders. I woke to the smell of braised pork. That was the best meal I had in those 2 months. After I submitted the paper, I checked my email constantly, like a high schooler waiting for college results. 3 weeks later, the reply came. The paper was accepted as an oral presentation at a top conference. One line from the peer reviewers I read over and over. This work proposes a fundamentally novel cross-modal semantic alignment method whose impact far exceeds current architectures. I sat at my desk staring at that email, my hands trembling slightly. Outside, rain was falling, trickling down the old building's exterior wall, splashing on the windowsill. The sound of rain filled the room. Then I made a decision. I sold my used car and used the money for a flight to San Francisco. I took about $15,000 from that $42,000 check and applied for a tourist visa. On the paper's corresponding author line, I listed myself as an independent researcher, no institutional affiliation. Professor Fong from Stanford had found my contact info through the conference system after reading the paper. He sent a sincere email. Mr. Shun, your ideas are very interesting. If you come to the Bay Area, I'd like to meet in person. I replied. I'll be there next week. 3 days before departure, I went to Lin Wan's office building. The high-rise was downtown, its blue glass curtain wall gleaming. I sat in the coffee shop downstairs for over an hour, nursing a cold Americano, watching the stream of people through the revolving doors. Around 5, Lin Wan appeared. She wore a gray suit, and beside her was a tall man with an expensive watch, his hand resting casually on her shoulder as they talked. Chen Hongyu. I'd looked him up before, an investor with a few tech projects under his belt. Known in the circle, he'd been close to Lin Wan for a while. I'd heard whispers before the divorce, but never let myself dig deeper. They walked to the parking lot. Lin Wan's car was a white Mercedes. Chen Hongyu opened the door for her. She bent to get in. I stood up, walked to the coffee shop door, and called out, Lin Wan. She turned. When she saw me, a flash of surprise crossed her face. It then quickly shifted to irritation. Shenyu. What are you doing here? I stood on the steps, still holding that cold coffee. It had been months since I'd last seen her. She looked good, hair shorter, face sharper. The man beside her gave me a once-over, his eyes carrying that casual superiority. I'm going to the U.S. next Tuesday, I said. Stanford. For some research. Just wanted to let you know. Lin Wan blinked. Beside her, Chen Hongyu let out a soft laugh, and said in a low voice, not quite a whisper, Stanford. Tourist. Maybe. He said it loud enough for me to hear. Lin Wan's expression shifted between surprise and annoyance twice. Then she said coldly, Shenyu, you don't need to tell me your plans. We're done. Whether you go do research or go flip burgers, it's nothing to me. Stop coming around. Okay. She paused, then added, her voice lowering. If you're short on money, that card I gave you still works. You don't need to make up excuses to see me. The coffee cup in my hand crumpled slightly. I looked into her eyes that once held warmth, that now filled with wariness and contempt. Chen Hongyu leaned in and whispered something in her ear. She laughed. Okay, I said. Sorry to bother you. I threw the untouched coffee into a nearby trash can. Turned and walked away. Behind me, the sound of a car door closing, soft, but it hit my ears like a slap. When I reached the end of the street, I looked back. The white Mercedes had merged into traffic and disappeared. The autumn sun cast a long shadow of me across the pavement. I pulled out my phone, scrolled to Professor Fong's email, and read it again. Then I opened my notes app and typed, Tuesday, 3 p.m., Shanghai to San Francisco. I put the phone away and kept walking. The sycamore leaves along the street had fallen, crunching underfoot. The wind was strong, flipping my jacket. But I wasn't cold. Lin Wan. You asked me to stop coming around. Fine. I won't. You win. But when I come back, you'll probably regret this afternoon, standing at the coffee shop door, on someone else's arm, telling me I'm going to flip burgers. I quickened my pace. Ahead was the direction of the old town, that narrow lane hiding my old desk, my broken laptop, my pipe dream from 11 years ago. It wouldn't be a pipe dream for much longer. The rain in San Francisco didn't let up. My first 3 days were spent in a hostel. 12 to a room. Bunk beds. The German backpacker in the bunk next to mine made phone calls at 4 a.m. every day, keeping me awake. Between the time difference and the damp, cold weather, my cold wouldn't go away. My nose was stuffed like 2 cotton balls. Professor Fong invited me to meet at Stanford. That day, I wore a gray hoodie from the discount rack at Uniqlo. It carried an old backpack. My hair windswept. As I walked through the campus, I passed a group of students in blazers. Coffee cups in hand, discussing experimental data on some quantum computing project. I walked slowly, looking at the red brick buildings and manicured lawns, thinking of the young man 11 years ago who'd been hunched over a busted laptop in his dorm, wrestling with algorithms. Back then, he wouldn't have even made it through the front gate. Professor Fong's office was on the second floor of an old computer science building. When I knocked, he was standing in front of a whiteboard, sketching something. He turned a Chinese face, about 60, wire-rimmed glasses, white shirt sleeves rolled to his elbows. Shenyu. Come. Sit. He put down the marker and shook my hand. I've read your paper 3 times. That recursive semantic mapping idea. I mentioned it in a talk. And several big-name tech leads chased me down for your contact info. I pulled out my laptop and opened the working sample. Professor Fong. Here's a runnable implementation. No internet. Single card inference. Give it a try. He leaned in. Pushing up his glasses. I typed in a messy mix of Chinese and English, no punctuation. Hit enter. The system output a complete, fluent multi-language translation in 1.8 seconds. Complete, with contextual emotion tagging and cross-modal implicit information extraction. He watched it once. Then again. Then he stood up and paced his office twice. Shenyu. He stopped in front of me. Would you like to come here as a visiting researcher? You won't need to pay. I have funding. 1 year. Salary included. Your only job. Turn this into a complete commercial-ready framework that I lay awake all night in that hostile bunk. The next morning, dark circles under my eyes, I replied. Yes. What followed was like a fast-forward button. Professor Fong helped me get an academic visa and arranged a small studio apartment with a kitchenette, tiny, but clean, with a real bed. The day I moved in, I dropped my luggage in the empty room and just stood there. My nose stung a little. The next 6 months were the toughest and most grounded of my life. Days in the lab, training models, tweaking parameters, writing papers. Nights, washing dishes at a Chinese restaurant nearby. Professor Fong's salary covered rent and food, but I wanted to save more. In case the project failed, I'd have a fallback. The restaurant owner was from Fujian. She saw I worked hard. Eventually had me run food too. Paying me $2 more an hour. I didn't post anything on social media during those months. My Chinese number was deactivated. Only Zhou video called me occasionally. Once he said, "Xinyu, when did you get white hair?" I touched my temples, laughed, and said maybe the water here was tough. In the 10th month, the system's core metrics hit levels that surprised even me. Semantic understanding accuracy on cross-language tasks was 13 percentage points higher than the industry's best. Inference latency was under 800 milliseconds. Multimodal alignment generalization outperformed all known open-source models. Professor Fong stared at the latest test report for a long time after reading it. Then he said, "Xinyu, you can stop washing dishes. Starting tomorrow, I'm taking you to meet some people." The first person he took me to meet was Pete, a partner at a top-tier Silicon Valley VC. After seeing the demo, Pete asked one question. "Do you want to turn this into a business or publish a paper and be done? A business," I said. "Good." He pulled out a business card and handed it to me. "Bring a business plan to my office next week. Xinyu, your tech is at least 2 generations ahead of everything on the market. This isn't just about translation engines. It's the next generation interface for human-computer interaction." Pete led the first round. $7 million. 2 more investors joined later. The valuation quadrupled within 3 months. I registered a company and named it Lingua. Latin for new language. Professor Fong became scientific advisor. My title, founder CTO. The night the company was founded, I went back to my apartment, made myself a bowl of instant noodles, and cracked an egg into it. Outside, the San Francisco night sky sparkled. The Bay Bridge's lights strung together like a golden chain. I sat at my table, finished the noodles, drank the broth, and wiped my mouth with a napkin. Then I opened my laptop, filed the incorporation documents and first-round term sheet neatly into a folder. I named the folder Start Point. 2 months later, Forbes magazine reached out. They were doing a feature on rising stars under 30. The editor said over the phone, "Mr. Shun, your story is compelling. A man who came from China to Silicon Valley with 11-year-old code and changed the game in a year. We'd like to put you on the cover." I agreed. The interview was at a quiet cafe in San Francisco. The journalist asked many questions about tech, entrepreneurship, the future. The last one, looking back, what would you say to your past self? I thought for a moment, then said, "Don't give up on that wild idea." A week before the magazine came out, Zhou sent me a message. "Xinyu, Linwan's company is in Series A fundraising. They're pitching a self-developed AI translation engine. But I read their technical white paper. The core architecture looks a lot like your old version. Want to take a look?" He sent me a PDF. I opened it and flipped through. My hand stopped. The self-developed algorithm flowchart looked almost identical to my old architecture diagram. They'd changed variable names that recolored the flowchart. But the core recursive mapping logic and cross-modal alignment structure, even the parameter layer partitions, were a direct copy. The only thing they hadn't copied was what I'd iterated and optimized over the years, the part their system couldn't run. What they demoed in their roadshows was just the shell, the most primitive version. It worked for simple sentences. Anything more complex, and it crashed. But investors didn't understand that. They saw an architecture that looked like market leaders and were impressed. I closed the PDF and leaned back. "Linwan, you thought I was worthless. Now the core of your company's fundraising pitch is an idea your ex-husband wrote half of 11 years ago and got called a pipe dream for My phone rang. "Professor Fong. Xinyu, don't forget your documents for the Shanghai summit tomorrow." I replied. "Got it." Then I closed my laptop, stood up, and walked to the window. The Bay Area night glittered, 1,000 pieces of scattered gold. Tomorrow I'd be flying back to where it all began. "Linwan, you'll be at that summit too. I checked the schedule. You're listed under rising AI leaders. with a subtitle. Lin Wan, founder CEO. Cloudword Technology. CEO, you're standing on stage fundraising. Pitching. Telling the world this is original, using code I threw away a year ago that you stood in front of me and told me to go flip burgers. A year later. I'm coming back with a Forbes cover. $0.7 million in funding. And a $1 billion valuation. Tomorrow at the summit. You'll be in the audience. Watch closely. Watch the man you called worthless take the stage. That first 6 months. The toughest part. I never told anyone about. Professor Fong gave me a key to the lab. I stayed until 3 or 4 a.m. most nights. The computer science building was empty. The hallway lights were motion activated. Every step lit a section. And the one behind went dark. It felt like walking through a tunnel. One stretch of light, one stretch of dark. I couldn't see far ahead. But every step landed on light. The model crashed most often. Week 7. I changed the activation function in the semantic mapping layer. And the network's convergence curve went haywire. After 30 hours. Error rates rose instead of falling. Like a runaway horse charging a cliff. That night I sat in the lab chair, staring at the screen. An error value I'd never seen before. I stared for half an hour. Someone downstairs was playing guitar. Picking out a tune I couldn't recognize. I went back to the 11-year-old source code. Recalculated the math by hand from scratch. And realized what the problem was. Back then. I'd used a simple threshold clipping logic to prevent gradient explosion. In the new version. I'd swapped it out for a more advanced normalization method. And that broke the semantic distribution stability. I spent 2 days replacing the activation function, adding an adaptive gating layer. The error curve started converging again. At hour 56. The validation accuracy jumped above my target. I sat there staring at the number, feeling a sudden urge to cry. But I didn't. I hadn't cried in 3 years. 3 months into washing dishes. The restaurant owner asked, "What do you actually do?" I said I did research at the university nearby. She said, "Oh." And from then on, every time I left, she'd pack me a container of fried rice, and no charge. Take it for a late-night snack. My apartment was on a quiet street. Next door lived a music student. A woman in her 60s who practiced cello every Thursday afternoon. The notes were long and low. Drifting through the wall. Like someone sighing underwater. Sometimes. When I was coding. Those notes would wash over me. And my brain would relax. The ideas flowing better. The poorest month. My balance was $173. 2 weeks to payday. I cut from 3 meals to 2. Salad at the campus cafeteria for lunch. Cheap and filling. And a bowl of dry noodles with chili sauce at night. I lost 6 pounds that month. My belt needed a new notch. But money wasn't the hard part. The hard part was walking a path no one had ever walked, with no one to tell you whether you were going the right way. Professor Fong was busy. We could meet in person maybe twice a month. Most of the time. I was alone in the lab. Talking to myself through code and charts. Sometimes I talked to the me from 11 years ago. You didn't write that for nothing. Someone saw it. Sometimes I'd ask, what if it fails again? What if this framework still can't beat the big models? No answers. Just the click of the keyboard. One step at a time. In the 8th month, the system ran its first complete multimodal interactive sample. I hooked up a camera and microphone. I said in Chinese, "What book is that girl in the red dress holding?" In 900 milliseconds. The system identified the scene. Located the girl. Recognized the book cover text. And output a fluent English sentence. I tried English to Chinese next. I spoke a complex physics concept about quantum entanglement. The system not only produced fluent Chinese, but automatically added contextual glosses for technical terms. And tagged the tone as neutral/objective. I tested a dozen different input scenarios. Mixed languages. Noisy backgrounds. Shorthand speech. Dense jargon. Every result was better than I'd expected. That night. I ran the demo over and over. The system was stable at 900 to 1,200 milliseconds. Semantic accuracy above 94%. At 3 a.m. I shut it down and walked into the hallway. The motion sensor lights lit a stretch. Then fell dark again behind me. The offices were all closed. I leaned against the wall. Looked at the ventilation ducts on the ceiling. And felt something slowly swell in my chest. Until my ribs ached with it. 11 years. From that autumn, when the professor told me I was wrong. This empty hallway at 3 in the morning. In between. A failed marriage. 2 dead startups. The autumn I was thrown out with nothing. And the nights I washed dishes in a foreign country alone. All the paths led here. After that. The iteration pace accelerated. The The bottleneck was broken. Over the next 2 months, I pushed 7 versions, each one better in different dimensions. After Professor Fong saw the 7th test report, he took me to meet Pete. The rest was the fundraising story. But that night in the empty hallway, with the motion sensor lights and the view of San Francisco's distant sparkles through the window, no one knew what was forming on my desk. No applause, no congratulations, not even a single person to look in. But that was my truest moment. Lynn W.A.N.A.T. that coffee shop door told me to go flip burgers. She probably couldn't imagine what my life had become. I wasn't flipping burgers. I was building a skyscraper. I'd been drawing the blueprints for 11 years, laying the foundation for a year. The first floor was just now being decked. She'd never understand. She'd never understood what I was reaching for. I remembered an argument we had early in the marriage. She said, "Shinyu, what's the use of writing that incomprehensible code every day? Can you cash it out?" I said some things aren't meant to be cashed out right away. She slammed the door on her way out. Came back with a box of strawberries. I thought it was a peace offering. Only later did I realize she'd just bought them on a whim. Nothing to do with her mood. That incomprehensible code was now worth $7 million. Series A. Those useless algorithms now had companies lining up for licenses. Those nights I spent staying up, not knowing what I was doing. Looking back, every one was a setup. I packed my bags in that San Francisco apartment. I found a photo of the $42,000 check. I'd left the original in China. But I had a scan on my phone. The photo was taken half a year before the divorce. I'd been sitting at my desk, wondering when I'd finally need that rainy day fund. Now I'd used it. Not as a rainy day fund. I locked my phone. Folded the last shirt into the suitcase. Outside, the sky was that clear San Francisco blue, with fluffy clouds drifting slowly. Next door, the cello started again. A bright, lively tune I'd never heard. Like a thawing stream in spring. Tomorrow, I'd fly back. The summit was the day after. My name was second on the speaker list. Shinyu, founder CTO, Lingua. Zhou had sent me the domestic summit schedule earlier. Lin Wan's pitch was on day 1 at 3:30 p.m. New directions in AI translation. Her company, Cloudword Technology, that was pitching a self-developed semantic engine, .my talk was day 2 at 9 a.m. From 0 to a billion. An algorithm's 10,000 days, 10,000 days. From the day in my junior year when I wrote that first line of code. To today, Lin Wan, will you be in the audience? You should be. After all, you were there for many of those days. You just thought I was wasting my time. Now you'll see. When the plane landed in Shanghai. It was early morning. Haze. Gray, a different world from San Francisco's clarity. I pushed my luggage cart through arrivals. Zhou was waiting at the exit. His hair buzzed short. Wearing a black jacket. When he saw me. He grinned and waved. Shinyu. Damn, you got thin. He gave me a solid hug that pounded my back. You got fat. Office job. Man. He took my luggage cart and walked out. Car's outside. I'll take you to the hotel. Professor Fong said to rest up. You need to be sharp for the summit. Driving. Zhou caught me up on the past 2 years. His small company had been acquired. He was now a cloud architect at a big tech firm. Living comfortably. When he mentioned Lin Wan. His tone got careful. He glanced at me in the rearview mirror. You know about her company. Right. I know. Funding roadshow. AI translation. I read their white paper. Hard to look at. Shinyu, she's basically copied your old stuff, just with a new paint job. But her core can't handle high concurrency. At an industry talk I went to. Someone asked her a tech question. She couldn't answer. Chun Hongyu stepped in. Chun Hongyu's still around. Yeah. He's listed as co-founder. Zhou smirked. He's good at selling stories to investors. When I sold those search engine shares. I remember the company got bought by a big tech firm later. You got lowballed on the price. Right. Yet I was in a hurry. Took 30% off. Zhou clicked his tongue. If you'd waited half a year, that check would have been 10 times bigger. But then, Lin Wan's dad needed surgery. You couldn't wait. He paused. Why were you in such a rush? I didn't answer. Outside. The gray buildings slid past on either side. Some I recognized. Some were new. The city changed fast. But some things stayed the same. Shanghai winters were still cold and damp. Zhou checked me into the hotel. Before leaving. He clapped my shoulder. Kill it tomorrow. I'll be in the front row clapping. I showered. Changed. And lay on the bed for a while. The jet lag made my head fuzzy. My eyelids heavy. But my mind was already spinning on tomorrow. As I drifted. My phone buzzed. It was the Forbes editor. A preview of the cover. I opened the image. Dark gray background. Me in a white shirt on a metal chair. Looking sideways. The headline. From a basement in Silicon Valley to the future of AI. Shin Yu's comeback. My eyes in the photo looked sharper than real life. Probably the photographer's doing. I stared at it for a long time, then locked the screen. Flipped over. And closed my eyes. The next morning I wore a new navy suit, white shirt, and no tie. Joe said, casual but sharp. The main conference hall was at a convention center in Pudong. I spent a few minutes in the green room. Professor Fong flew in from another city. Walked in. Shook my hand. Nervous. And oh, I said. And I meant it. Standing on stage. Talking about my algorithm. My company. My 10,000 days. Nothing to be nervous about. It was all real. At 9 a.m. The MC called my name. I walked onto the stage, the lights flooding down. The audience a sea of darkness. I couldn't make out faces. But I swept my gaze across and paused for a moment at the third row. Left side. Lin Wan sat there. Chun Hongyu beside her. She wore a light blue suit. Her hair perfectly styled. Phone in hand with the screen lit. But her gaze was locked on the stage. I opened my laptop and connected to the projector. Hello everyone. I'm Shin Yu. Founder of Lingua. I paused. Today I want to tell you a story. About technology. And about time. When the first slide came up. A low murmur rippled through the crowd. It was my Forbes cover. The magazine display at the venue featured it. Some people had probably already seen it online. I clicked to the second slide. This is source code I wrote in my junior year of college. Modified date. Autumn of 2007. 11 years ago. My professor called it a pipe dream. I gave up the project and went to work. That code sat on my hard drive for 10 years. The room was silent. I saw Lin Wan's shoulders stiffen. Until a little over a year ago. I dug this code out. At the time I was newly divorced, unemployed, living in a $700 a month room in an old neighborhood. I picked it up again, rewrote it, retuned it, retested it. 11 months ago I brought the first sample to Silicon Valley. 10 months ago I started as a visiting researcher. 7 months ago I got my first funding. 3 months ago Lingua's valuation exceeded $1 billion. I ran the system demo in real time. Translation. Multimodal recognition. Semantic alignment. Emotion tagging. All fluid. Seamless. Applause broke out. But I didn't stop. What I want to say today is this. More than 90% of the underlying logic of this system came from the code I wrote 11 years ago. It didn't appear overnight. It lay on my hard drive for 10 years. No one saw it. For 10 years I thought I was worthless. When I said worthless, I looked at the third row. I couldn't see Lin Wan's face clearly in the stage lights, but she lowered her head. Her phone screen was still on. But her hands were on her lap. Clenched slightly. Chen Hongyu's expression I could read clearly. His smile was gone. His lips pressed thin. His gaze fixed on the empty seat beside him. When I finished, the audience rose to their feet. I bowed slightly. The lights almost blinding. Then I stepped off stage and was immediately surrounded in the corridor. Business cards. Photos. Interview requests. After everyone finally dispersed, I leaned against the wall. Water bottle in hand. And took a breath. My phone buzzed. Zhou, Shinyu. That part about the 10 years made me cry like a baby. I smiled and put the phone down. When I looked up, Lin Wan stood at the entrance of the green room. She didn't approach, just stood there. About 30 feet away. On the other side of a table piled with brochures. She was looking at me. Lips slightly parted, as if she wanted to speak, but couldn't. Shin Hongyu wasn't beside her. I took one glance, then put the cap back on my water bottle and walked toward the exit which happened to pass by her. As I drew closer, I saw her face clearly. Impeccable makeup, but the skin around her eyes was pink, or her nose tipped pink too. She'd been crying. Or was holding it in. Shinyu. Her voice was lower than I remembered. A little hoarse. I watched her talk. When did you go to America? Last autumn, I said. I came to your office building and told you. She froze. Then, like she'd been struck, she swayed slightly. That day. The parking lot entrance you said you were going to Stanford for research. That was real. Real. Her lips opened. Her gaze dropped to the speaker badge on my chest. My name and title clearly printed. She stared at it for a long time, then looked away. A potted plant nearby. Shinyu. Her voice was even quieter. I said some terrible things that day. I'm sorry. It's okay, I said. You were right. Back then. I was worthless. She jerked her head up. As if those words hurt more than any accusation. Now things are different, I added. Lin Wan. The past is past. I wish you and your company well. Then I stepped past her, walking without slowing. Out of the green room, into the hallway. My footsteps were silent on the carpet. At the corner, I looked back. Lin Wan was still standing there, back to me, one hand braced on the table, her shoulders trembling slightly. I turned back and kept walking. The wind from the window at the end of the hallway brought a dry winter chill, but I wasn't cold. Outside, the sun was out, breaking through the gray sky. A beam of light fell directly on the convention center steps, and I walked right through it. The second day of the summit featured a panel discussion. AI-driven business transformation, hosted by a seasoned industry journalist. 6 panelists, 4 tech executives from other companies, myself, and Lin Wan. Joe sent me the schedule with a note. You're sharing the stage, I replied. I know. Before the panel, Professor Fong sent a voice message from San Francisco. Xinyu, keep it steady. Don't get into it with her up there. Your profile doesn't need to step on anyone to rise. I smiled and replied. Professor, don't worry. I'm past that. The panel was on the main stage. 6 white leather chairs in a row, at the background screen showing the topic and panelist names. My name was second from left. Lin Wan was third from right. 3 seats between us. She walked on stage from the side. Our eyes met briefly. Then she looked away and took her seat. After opening remarks, the host asked each panelist for a brief introduction. When Lin Wan's turn came, she cleared her throat and launched into her pitch, a well-rehearsed speech about CloudWord's self-developed AI translation engine. Fluent, polished, data carefully curated. Our system supports real-time translation across 28 languages, with latency under 2 seconds and 89% accuracy. In verticals, finance, legal, we optimize up to 94%. As she listed the numbers, someone in the audience flipped through their brochure. I knew her metrics used a different test standard than what I'd used in Silicon Valley. Under 2 seconds was static. Single task text translation. 89% was on a simplified test set. Any engineer would see through it. But not everyone in the audience was an engineer. There were investors, media, and business folks from outside the industry. When my turn came, the host asked, Mr. Shun, what's the biggest difference between Lingua's core tech and other translation engines? I adjusted the microphone. The biggest difference is, others do text translation. We do semantic understanding. Translation is just the surface output. Underneath, our system understands the structure of a sentence, its emotion, its context, then generates cross-language expressions based on a complete semantic map. This conceptual difference determines a fundamentally different technological path. We're not doing translation. We're doing human-computer interaction. People nodded. Some took notes. For example, I continued, the same Chinese sentence. How can you be like this? Semantic translation and literal translation yield completely different results. Literal translation gives you a word-for-word rendering. Our system judges emotion and dialogue history based on context, and outputs something closer to how a human would understand it. This isn't achieved by throwing data at the problem. It's done at the underlying logical structure level. After I finished, the host turned to Lin Wan. Ms. Lin, you mentioned CloudWord is also working on AI translation. What's your view on this semantic understanding direction Mr. Shun just described? Lin Wan's expression flickered for a fraction of a second. She picked up her water glass, took a sip, set it down, and answered. Semantic understanding is indeed an industry trend. We're moving in that direction too. But in my view, the key to practical deployment still depends on business scenarios and usable products. There's still a gap between pure academic breakthroughs and market acceptance. She didn't look at me as she said it, but I caught the phrase pure academic. A few investors in the room exchanged glances. Those in the know understood that Lingua's sample had been in commercial use for months. AT&T and Microsoft were already clients. Pure academic was the wrong label. I said nothing. Just nodded slightly. The discussion went on for another 10+ minutes about industry prospects. At one point, Lin Wan used a technical term, recursive semantic mapping. The host casually asked, that concept seems new. Is it one CloudWord proposed? Lin Wan paused, then said, yes. I heard someone in the audience turn to look at me. When the panel wrapped, the host invited all panelists to pose for a group photo. I stood in the middle. Lin Wan was at the far end. As the photographer raised the camera, she unconsciously moved toward the center, then realized the person next to her was me. And stepped back. Afterward, I went to the restroom to wash my face. Coming out, I saw Lin Wan, and Chun Hongyu at the far end of the hallway, arguing in low voices. Chun Hongyu had his back to me, but I could see his body language, gestures, fast speech, accusatory. Lin Wan faced my direction, her expression tight, lips compressed, occasionally responding with a soft retort. Finally, she pushed Chun Hongyu's arm away, turned, and walked off in the other direction. Chun Hongyu stood there, phone in hand, face pale. I looked away and took the side corridor back to the green room. After the afternoon session ended, Zhou picked me up for dinner. As we stepped outside the convention center, quick footsteps followed, heels on pavement. I turned. Lin Wan had run out, code in hand, nose red from the cold wind. Shinyu. Wait, I stopped and told Zhou to go to the car first. He glanced at me, then at her, nodded, and walked off. Lin Wan stood in front of me, breathing ragged, chest heaving. She stared at me for several seconds. When she spoke, her voice was raw, barely held together. Shinyu. Why, back, then, why didn't you tell me you had that algorithm? Why didn't you tell me that's what you went to America for? If you told me that I would have, I told you. I said. She froze, I in my junior year, I told you about my project. You said I'd never finish it. Last autumn, I came to your office building and told you I was going to Stanford for research. You told me to stop coming around. Lin Wan. I told you. You didn't listen. Her mouth hung open, a fishbone caught in her throat. The wind blew her hair across her face. She brushed it away, and I saw her fingers trembling, I didn't know that was real. Her voice dropped. I thought you were just making up another excuse. I know, I said. You always thought what I did was just a pipe dream. When you filed for divorce, that you said in mediation that I had no steady job and made zero financial contribution. I remember those words. Lin Wan. When you said I was worthless, I didn't argue, because back then, I had no results to show you. But now I do. And you come running to say, why didn't you tell me earlier? Her eyes reddened. The professional mask she'd worn all day finally cracked. Shinyu. I was brainwashed by Chun Hongyu. He told me your projects were all a waste of time. Said you were living off me. Said you'd never make anything of yourself, and I should cut my losses. I believed him. I believed that bastard. Tears spilled down her cheeks, turning cold in the winter wind. What do you believe now? I asked. She looked at me, tears streaming, mouth open, unable to answer. Lin Wan, I said. A year ago, you said I was worthless. A year later, you're standing in front of me crying. But you're not crying because you're sorry for what you did. You're crying because you realized you were wrong. You realized the person you kicked out succeeded. You realized the person you chose ran away when things got tough. You don't regret hurting me. You regret hurting the wrong person. She flinched, stepping back half a step like she'd been slapped. I stood where I was, watching the tear tracks on her face dry in the wind. Lin Wan, go back inside. It's cold out here. I turned and walked toward Zhou's car. No footsteps followed. As I got in, Zhou looked at me from the driver's seat, hesitated. It then said nothing. Let's go, I said. The car pulled into traffic. In the mirror, I watched Lin Wan shrink. A thin figure standing alone at the convention center entrance, hunched like a tree bending in the wind. A turn later, she was gone. Zhou drove in silence for a few minutes before speaking. What did she say? Nothing. Everything that needed saying was said. The sky was darkening. Streetlights flickered on one by one. I leaned back, eyes closed, watching the light glide across the window. I felt nothing. That old feeling, the one that would keep me up all night over a single furrow of her brow, had retreated like a tide, leaving only dry sand. Nothing left. And that was fine. 3 days after the summit, I met Zhou at a quiet tea house. Iron Buddha tea'd, the leaves unfurled slowly in a clear glass cup, releasing their fragrance. I pushed a document across the table. What's this? He flipped through 2 pages. Eyebrows rising. Shinyu. This is code comparison report. I did it myself. A line-by-line comparison between my original 11-year-old code and the flowcharts in CloudWord's technical white paper. The regions with over 70% similarity are marked in red. Attached is timestamp verification for each. Zhou's expression grew more serious as he read. Shinyu, if this gets out, Lin Wan's company will explode. I know. What are you going to do with it? I leaned back, gazing at the gray-white sky outside. The tea house had a guzheng playing softly in the background. Clear, not too loud. 2 old men played chess at a nearby table. The solid clack of pieces hitting the board punctuated the room. I have a contact at the IP Protection Association, I said. I sent them the material. They'll do an independent evaluation. If they confirm infringement, we follow the formal process. Joe put the document down, picked up his tea, and was silent for a moment. Then he looked at me, complex emotions in his gaze. Shinyu, are you really going through with this? Lin Wan's company is close to closing their Series A. If this breaks now, that the core tech is lifted, the whole thing collapses. Shin Hongyu, what about me? I said, when they pitched for funding, that white paper was printed with my old architecture. That's a fact. The self-developed claim on their website doesn't match reality. That's also a fact. Whether the funding falls through or the house collapses, that's their problem. Joe, tell me, should I keep quiet just because I'm afraid she'll suffer? Joe stared at me for a long moment, then shook his head slowly. You've changed. Before that you'd think too much. Hesitate. Now, I said that I just don't want to spend so much energy worrying about others. I set my teacup down. I worried too much about her before. Afraid she'd get tired. So when she said step back, I stepped back. Afraid she'd be angry. So when she said divorce, I didn't fight. Afraid she'd be embarrassed. So I kept that $42,000 check hidden for 3 years. Then she called me worthless. Without batting an eye. Joe, what did all that consideration get me? It got my name erased, me kicked out, and my work used to raise money. The gouging stopped. The world went quiet for a beat. Then it started again, a faster pace this time. Outside, light broke through the clouds, falling on the rim of the teacup in a small bright ring. Joe was quiet for a long time. Then he picked up the document, set it back in front of me, and said, You've made up your mind. I support you. 2 days later, the IP Protection Association's preliminary evaluation came back. Their conclusion was clear and unequivocal. The core algorithmic architecture in CloudWord Technologies' white paper is substantially similar to the original work created by Shinyu in 2007. The original author possesses a complete chain of timestamped evidence. It is recommended that the copyright holder pursue legal recourse. I forwarded the evaluation to CloudWord's corporate email address, with a copy to the company's legal contact. No conditions, no offer of private settlement, just a formal notification that I was initiating legal proceedings. After hitting send, I closed my laptop and sat on the hotel room couch. Outside, Shanghai's dusk painted the sky in warm orange. Lights began to flicker on in the towers in the distance. I stared at the twilight. It felt like waiting for exam results you already knew. No more nerves. All the answers had been written. That evening, Lin Wan called. Her voice on the other end was worn, hollow, stripped of its usual composure, like something she'd never experienced before. Shinyu, I got your email. Okay. Oh, you know what you're doing. Her voice trembled. I'm signing the Series A term sheet the day after tomorrow. Investors are already at the table. If you send this now, the whole company dies. Lin Wan, I said. Where did you get the architecture diagram in your white paper? There was a long silence. Then, weekly, Chun Hongyu gave it to me. He said it was an open-source project from a team he invested in. Said we could just use it. I asked him about copyright. And he said he checked. There were no issues. So I believed him. Did you check? A longer silence. No, you didn't check where that solution came from. You didn't compare it to public code bases. You didn't bring in a third-party technical due diligence team. My voice was flat. You just printed it in your white paper and took it to investors. Lin Wan, you've been a CEO this long that you understand this. On the other end, I heard muffled sobs. She was crying, covering her mouth, not wanting me to hear. Shinyu, I know I'm wrong. I should have checked. I should have been careful. But Chun Hongyu, he always said he'd handle the technical side. And I should focus on business. He said I didn't need to understand the details as long as someone did. I trusted him too much. What are you going to do now? She sniffled. I confronted him this afternoon. I took your email to him. At first, he denied it. Said he'd just modified an open-source project. Then I showed him your comparison report. He flipped. He said, what do you want from me? You agreed to use it too. Shinyu. When he said that, I realized he'd never seen me as a partner. Her muffled sobs broke through again. Lin Wan. Shin Hongyu gave you a mistake you can't afford. But you signed the papers. You stamped them with your company seal. When you kicked me out thinking I was worthless, did you ever think you'd someday need to stand on that worthless thing of mine? She cried harder. Shinyu, what will it take for you to let me off? Name your terms. I'll do anything. I'll split the company with you. I'll change every credit on the white paper to your name. Whatever you want, and I don't want your shares, I said. I want you to withdraw all public claims about this algorithm and formally excise the technical content from your product line. That's my only condition. But then the company would have nothing. Should have thought of that sooner. When you use someone else's work, that you should know there's a day it might be taken away. A long silence. Then she whispered, "Shouldn't you? You weren't like this before." I held the phone to my ear, watching the last orange light sink below the horizon. The old Shinyu you threw away. The new one that you built him. I hung up. The room was quiet. I set the phone on the table, walked to the window. Shanghai's night had fully arrived. A sea of lights spread below, each one holding its own human story. In the distance, a child set off a firework, a thin stream of light shot up, burst into golden sparks, and slowly died. My phone buzzed again. A text. From Lin, one. I accept your terms. Formal notice tomorrow. I didn't reply. I locked the phone, put it away, opened my laptop, and pulled up a draft email. The recipient. Harvard's Computer Science Department. Their visiting scholar invitation. The email was my acceptance, already written. I filled in the date, signed it, and hit send. The progress bar spun twice. Sent. I leaned back, stared at the ceiling. There'd be a lot of paperwork tomorrow. Lawyers, evidence, tech separation coordination. Probably a week or two. But Professor Fong was right. The rest of the path was already paved. Harvard's invitation. The company's operations in Silicon Valley. New product development. Everything was waiting in line. I mentally sorted the order, shut the laptop, stood up, and stretched. The fireworks were over. The night was still. The river of lights stretched on. I turned off the room light, lay down on the bed, and closed my eyes. Behind my eyelids, I saw the window of my San Francisco apartment, the Bay Bridge's golden string of lights. Then Shun Yu. Staring at old code in the library. Then Shun Yu. Signing the divorce papers in the mediation room. Then Shin Yu. Pulling out an old laptop. Then Shin Yu. Watching the first sample run in the Stanford lab. One Shin Yu piled on top of another, until they all became the one lying on this bed right now. Tomorrow. Many things to do. But tonight. Nothing to think about. I rolled over and fell deep asleep. The dream was black and sweet. Nothing. Lin Wan's formal notice arrived the next afternoon. Carefully worded. Cloud word technology. After internal review. Acknowledges that certain content in its technical white paper is sourced from a disputed reference. Effective immediately. All related promotional materials will be withdrawn. Product rollout for this technical path will be suspended. And we will actively cooperate with the copyright holder's subsequent legal procedures. Signed, sealed, and bearing Lin Wan's signature at the bottom. I forwarded the notice to my lawyer and replied to the IP Association, explaining that the other party had committed to compliance and suggesting a temporary stay on litigation pending observation. The association agreed. That evening, Zhou took me to dinner at a long-established restaurant on Nanjing Road. He arrived first, with a pot of warm rice wine and 2 cold appetizers. I sat down, and he poured me a cup. We clinked rims. First phase done, he said. I took a sip. The warm liquid slid down my throat. There are still a few months of compliance monitoring. The lawyer will handle it. I don't plan to be directly involved. What about Chun Hong Yu? He texted me this afternoon. I showed Zhou the phone. It was a long message, politely phrased. Mr. Shun. I deeply apologize for the technical reference issue. I hope we can meet in person to discuss compensation. Perfect crisis management language. Smooth, sealed. How'd you reply? I didn't. Zhou laughed at chewing a piece of beef. Shin Yu. The way you're handling this now. It hurts him more than 100 accusations. He prepared an entire script to negotiate with you. You didn't even give him a chance. The way he and Lin Wan shut me up was by not giving me a chance. I took another sip. I'm just returning the favor. The warmth of the wine spread through my stomach. Comfortable. Outside. Nanjing Road's neon lights shone brightly. The crowd flowing below. A moving. Colorful painting. We ate quietly. Chatting about the company and Zhou's new projects. Halfway through. My phone buzzed. A bank notification. A deposit. I opened it and checked the amount. Then the note. Technical licensing compensation on behalf of Cloudword Technology. Behind it. A third-party financial account. The amount was exact. $42,000, the same amount as the check I'd left behind. It had come back to where it belonged. I set the phone aside and finished the last of my wine. I got home around 10. I showered. Changed into pajamas. And sat by the window. Scrolling through my phone. A new post from Lin Wan showed up in my feed. A photo of an open book. Title unreadable. The caption read, "Some things when you're wrong. You're wrong. No excuses." I scrolled past. No likes. No comments. Her posting frequency had dropped. Her last one was from the summit. A group photo. A standard smile. But if you looked closely. Her mouth was held tight. I closed her profile. Didn't like. Didn't comment. The next afternoon, Lin Wan came to my hotel. Front desk called up. I hesitated but then told them to send her up. She wasn't wearing makeup today. Her hair was in a simple ponytail, a gray hoodie and jeans. She looked much thinner than before. In the harsh light, her nasolabial folds were prominent. She stood in the doorway holding a paper bag. When I opened the door, she lowered her head slightly. I brought you something. She handed me the bag. That old bakery you used to like. Osmanthus cake. I happened to pass by. I took it and set it on the table. Come in. She came in and sat on the edge of the sofa. Hands clasped on her knees. I poured a glass of water and set it before her. She said thank you. Held it. But didn't drink. I got the money. She said. Good. That money was always yours. The check from selling your shares. I saw it in the safe. I knew you had it, but I didn't want to ask. Because if I asked, I'd be admitting you had more of a fallback in this marriage than I did. She looked down at the glass. I never wanted to admit you needed a fallback. Because then I couldn't keep telling myself you couldn't survive without me. I leaned back and watched her. Her voice was flat as if telling someone else's story. Later, Chun Hong Yu pushed for the divorce. He said your projects were money pits. He said if I didn't cut you loose that you'd drag me down. I trusted him completely. Because your projects had failed point one after another. All I saw was you losing. I never saw the code you rewrote 10 times. I never saw the light still on at 3 a.m. I only looked at the results. She looked up. Eyes red, but not crying. Shin Yu, I'm not here to ask for your forgiveness. I just want to say all this. Then say it, I said. Chun Hong Yu came to me yesterday. Said he could fix the tech separation problem. But his price was 40% of the company's shares. I refused. He flipped. He said the company only got funding because of his connections. And the tech issue was my problem. Not his. He said the same things to me that he said about you. A year ago. He's not reliable. You'd better cut your losses now. She gave a bitter laugh. I thought he was right back then because I wanted to hear it. Now that he's saying the same things to me, I can hear how disgusting it sounds. She set down the glass and stood up, looking at me. Shin Yu, that day at the convention center entrance that you said I wasn't sorry for hurting you. I was sorry for hurting the wrong person. I wanted to argue then, but now I think you were right. I regret hurting the wrong person. I regret choosing someone who ran at the first sign of trouble. And not trusting someone who stuck it out for 10 years. But my regret doesn't mean you should look back. I understand. I picked up the paper bag from the table and opened it. Inside was a clear box of osmanthus cake, soft white squares dotted with golden osmanthus, a faint sweet fragrance drifting through the plastic. Back in the old days, when we lived in that old building, there was a bakery downstairs. I used to go every weekend and buy a box to leave on the coffee table. Lin Wan would eat pieces while watching TV. Crumbs everywhere. The shop was still there. She remembered. I picked up a piece and took a bite. Soft, sweet, fragrant, just like it always was. Good. She asked. Yeah. She nodded, turned. And walked to the door. At the threshold, she stopped. Back still to me. Shin Yu, my mom's coming home from the hospital this week. That extra payment you arranged. I found out. Thank you. Don't thank me. Your mom was good to me. When we got married, she made a batch of steamed buns and brought them to our rented apartment. Told me to eat more. I remember. Her hand on the door handle paused. Her shoulder moved slightly. Then she pulled the door open and walked out. The sound of her footsteps faded. Finally swallowed by the elevator's ding. I sat on the sofa and closed the lid of the osmanthus cake box, setting it on the corner of the coffee table. Outside, the afternoon light was white and bright, filling the whole room. My phone rang. Professor Fong's video call. He was cheerful when I answered. Shin Yu, Harvard called. They've confirmed your acceptance. Visiting professor position for the spring semester. Congratulations. Thank you, Professor. I wouldn't be here without you. Spare me. That code sat on your hard drive for 10 years. Anyone else would have reformatted it 800 times. You're the one who never threw it away. When are you coming back? Next week's flight. Good. I'll pick you up. After the call. I leaned back on the couch for a while. Sunlight poured through the window, drawing a long golden band across the wooden floor. The air was warm and still. Carrying the faint sweetness of osmanthus. I stood and walked to the window. Down below. The street was busy. A kid on a scooter gliding past. A parent yelling slow down. Beyond, the skyline rose against a gray-blue sky. Each building holding its own 1,000 stories. I thought of that autumn 11 years ago. The professor calling it a pipe dream. The winter 8 years ago. The failed startup. Lin Wan saying, what's the use of all that? The mediation room's sunlight a little over a year ago, falling like bars of a cage. Now all those bars were broken. I pulled out my phone and texted Joe. Flying back to San Francisco next week. Let's have dinner before I go. Joe replied instantly. Deal. What are we celebrating? I thought for a moment, then typed 3 words. A new beginning. I pocketed the phone and walked back to the table. The osmanthus cake was still there. I opened the lid and took another piece. Eating slowly. Outside. Clouds drifted. And a beam of light broke through. Illuminating the whole street. The sounds of street vendors, children laughing, car horns, all blending into the city's signature white noise. I finished the cake. I folded the box and threw it away. Then I opened my suitcase and started packing. Shirts folded neatly. Laptop in a protective sleeve. Passport and ticket in the outermost zipper pocket. Not much. One case held everything. Just like when I'd left a year ago. The difference was back then I didn't know where I was going. Now I knew exactly. The Bay Bridge in San Francisco. The keyboard clicks in the lab. The neighbor's cello. The sunset outside the office window. Things I'd chosen. Earned. Walked myself into. I zipped up the suitcase and stood it against the wall. Then I sat down. Picked up the Forbes issue. And flipped to my cover. The photo showed a Shun Yu with sharp eyes and a slight smile. In a white shirt on a metal chair. I looked at him. A little unfamiliar. But also a little familiar. Outside. The clouds parted further. Sunlight flooded the room. I closed the magazine. Put it into the suitcase. And picked up my phone. I pulled up the flight confirmation page. Day after tomorrow. Shanghai to San Francisco. I locked the screen. Turned off the last light. A new life was waiting.